I do have a paper going on something very similar. But it's not about the agricultural sector. It's about 𝗪𝗺, the city in general, and the increase in male migration, and resultantly there's more female mobility in the street. You see more female mobility, but when you dig deeper, because it's a qualitative study, and particularly in one part of the city, it's true what you're saying. Women do get left behind, and it does change the economic dynamic, whether it's agricultural or not.
So I'm going to be covering 3 areas: the background of the book, existing scenario of social protection in Pakistan, and the focus areas in the book, along with policy recommendations, which is actually the major focus of the book. Each chapter ends with policy recommendations.
Clearly, there is instrumental importance for women, and this is reflected again when you start looking at the evidence. There's decades now of accumulated evidence that shows that the more you empower women vis-a-vis spending and other decision making, the better the outcomes for children, as well as many different multiplier effects throughout the economy.
75% of the women are not working, 74% are employed in the informal sector, and it's basically these women who are in need of universalistic state social protection measures.
Hello and assalamu alaikum, everyone. In today's webinar, we have Dr. Sara Jafree with us, who will introduce her new book, Social Policy for Women in Pakistan. Congratulations, Dr. Sara, for your new publication, and welcome to PIDE webinar series. We're also thankful to Dr. Hadia Majid, who will discuss Dr. Jafree's book and offer insights. Welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Great to be here. Looking forward to the discussion.
And likewise. Okay, before we begin, I'll briefly introduce both our guests, and without further ado, I'll hand over to Dr. Jafree. Dr. Sara Rizvi is currently serving as associate professor and chair of sociology at Forman Christian College University. She completed her BSc Honours in Economics from London School of Economics and Political Science, and her MPhil and PhD in Sociology from the Institute of Social and Cultural Studies, University of the Punjab. Dr. Jafree's area of interests lie in public health, minority studies, and social policy development. Dr. Jafree has written 3 books, including this one, and published over 40 papers in peer-reviewed and international journals. Her publications include experimental and intervention-based research designs. She has received funding for projects related to microfinance, poverty alleviation, intergenerational learning between the elderly and youth, and digital health literacy access for women at primary health care level. Dr. Jafree is the founding editor of the Forman Journal of Social Sciences and is also serving on the Forman Christian College University Institutional Review Board. Dr. Hadia Majid holds a PhD in development economics from the Ohio State University. Her research interests include economics of the household, parental decision-making, and human capital acquisition. Her earlier work evaluates the Mexican conditional cash transfer program at the intra-household level, the micro impacts of the Lahore Metro bus, and the impacts of the inequality on public goods access and charitable giving. Currently, she's focused on labor markets. Here, her projects include mapping various aspects of the female labor force participation in Pakistan over the past 30 years, examining the constraints and vulnerabilities of women in the urban informal economy, the status of decent work in rural Pakistan for men and women, the links between macroeconomic growth and gendered employment, the impact of Benazir Income Support Program on women's labor market outcomes and decision-making, and workplace harassment among female factory workers. She's currently serving as LUMS. A little about the book. Dr. Jafree's new book, Social Policy for Women in Pakistan, offers a broad view of the current state of women-centered policies in Pakistan and offers recommendations for a wide array of social policy areas, ranging from poverty alleviation and social protection, family and housing, food security and environment and climate justice, literacy and skill development, work and employment, health, etc. I would now invite Dr. Jafree to introduce the book. Following her presentation, we will have Dr. Majid with us, who will offer her questions and comments.
Thank you so much, Mariam. So starting off with a wonderful picture of my campus, probably one of the reasons why we get a lot of research work done over here. Forman Christian College University, I'm working in the Sociology department. This is the cover of the book we're talking about today. It's probably been more difficult to prepare this presentation than to actually write this book, jokes aside, because one doesn't know what to put in, what to leave out. But hopefully there's enough over here that compels everyone to actually go get a copy and read it. So I'm going to be covering 3 areas: the background of the book, existing scenario of social protection in Pakistan, and the focus areas in the book, along with policy recommendations, which is actually the major focus of the book. Each chapter ends with policy recommendations. Each chapter has a literature review background, but there's a lot of secondary data. When I was starting to write this book, I thought I would have more concrete data from the 𝗪cie𝗰𝗶𝗹 program and the SARS program, but we do have reported PDFs, but we don't have SPSS data files we can do cross-sectional analysis with. But hopefully future researchers might have that. There's primary data from 3 provinces of Pakistan, and these are the core areas of the book, which I'll be covering during the presentation. So this journey for the book has been about an 8-year process, and I'd like to credit my first professor when I was doing my MPhil leading to a PhD, Dr. 𝗪cie𝗰𝗶𝗆, who's not with us anymore. So many prayers for him. He used to tell us, when I started doing my research for women microfinance borrowers, the first thing he told me was that you're going to come across a lot of extra information. It's going to divert you, but just store it away, put it away in separate folders. And that's what I used to do. Whenever I used to come across interesting social policy measures and interventions, which might work in Pakistan, I used to put them aside. And here we are today. Also, about 2 years ago, when I was developing a course for Introduction to Social Policy at FCC, we needed a resource book. We had many and good ebooks from the West, especially Europe, but nothing from Pakistan. So the hope is that this is not just a book for students, but also for campaigners, policymakers, and other researchers. And to start off with a brief definition, it's probably the briefest and the best. Social policy attempts to improve the well-being of all members of society. Now, given its definition, it seems that it should be a focus for most governments, especially developing countries like Pakistan, but ironically, it's not. In fact, evidence from the global north suggests that even when economies are doing well, when the GDP is rising, women and other vulnerable groups during the life course need social policy interventions. Some researchers agree that we live in a world of welfare. The only other thing is that social policy needs to be designed with local evidence and with a careful regional planning, especially in consideration of the culture of a country. So obviously, Pakistan needs to develop a social protection floor. We have 114 million women in the country, and this is counting at a 2% percentage increase. We face numerous problems: feminization of poverty, feminization of disease. Unfortunately, our women are known with these terms: feminization of displacement. There are less females compared to males in schools, at the workplace, in political offices. And where laws exist, they're rarely implemented. So when I was starting off to write this book, I thought, well, how am I going to cover everything? And I just hope that I've done as the best that I could. There's much more that can be written and researched as well. So I hope that there are many more researchers in the future writing about different social policy needs and protective policies for different vulnerable groups. I myself am working for child protection. Let's see how that materializes. So Pakistan, actually, the good news is, has some employment security provisions for working women. The book details all of them. There are summary tables as well. And this is especially for researchers who might want to who would be focusing on specific areas so they can plug out information, especially students, and use that. The issue, however, is that only 25% of our women are part of the labor force. And only 26% of these are part of the formal sector, i.e. government or private sector employees who are eligible for employment security provisions. So what about the rest? 75% of the women are not working, 74% are employed in the informal sector, and it's basically these women who are in need of universalistic state social protection measures. There are some measures. Again, the book has all the details. Some examples are the BESP LHW program, Darul Aman, Sehat Sahulat, and also the Guzara allowance. So with each of these programs, the book explains what the area of provision is, which provinces they've been rolled out in, and what the coverage is, so that the book can actually elaborate on limitations and gaps. I'm going to just quote one example. The Guzara allowance, which is received from the Zakat and Ushr department, there is a grant for the chronically poor, including women, at PKR 1,500 per month. This has been rolled out in 3 provinces. The coverage in Balochistan, we don't have the data. KPK, under 30,000 people, and Punjab has around 170,000 beneficiaries. So just like with this Guzara allowance, a summary of all the limitations of our existing schemes are as follows. There's limited outreach. There's no confirmation about the number of beneficiaries for many schemes. We don't have any data about the extent of funds allocated or what may have been happening 5 years ago. Thus, the assessment of schemes is not possible. Upscale and then extension and then improvement or reformation or modification is also not possible. The existing employment security provisions have major gaps. Major omissions include maternal leave and child benefits, housing and car allowance, child education support, etc. For informal sector workers and non-working women, the major provision is weak, very weak and minimalistic cash transfers. This has very little impact on well-being of women or on long-term benefits. And there are also major errors in distribution for cash transfer schemes. So some of the primary data in the book includes information from current beneficiaries and past beneficiaries who are able to share that because of errors in calculation and proxy means testing, they've either receiving too small funds or they become ineligible 1 year to the other. So where do we go from here? Now, the book goes on to cover different policy substructure areas where policy is needed, starting with housing and family, probably under-researched area in Pakistan. And I think just a small comment for future researchers, you can actually separate these. I had to clump them together because of word count issues. So when family policy is introduced, like laws restricting dowry and expense for wedding food, these laws exist. It's excellent. They're implemented in urban cities. They're rarely legislated due to the traditional order, preference to follow past culture. And, in Pakistan, family is a closed and private unit. So it's very difficult to actually get these policies implemented and create social pressure for transformation. Other problematic areas: child marriage, husband's legal right to a second marriage, rights for seeking divorce from husband and gaining custody of children, also shelters for women who are semi-illiterate and wanting to escape marriages and joint families, and receiving benefits from the state beyond the 4-month iddat period. The Pakistan Household Integrated Economic Survey has no data about women living in different family types. Now, this is a major problem. We already know that in Pakistan, different family types have different problems. Nuclear families or single parent families have issues related to poverty. Reconstituted families have issues related to sexual violence, etc. But unless we have the data about family types, we're not going to be able to design prudent and relevant policies. So we have a long way to go. Recent data, secondary cross-sectional data in the book suggests that nearly all women at 97% don't own a house. Nearly all at 98% don't own land. Those who claim that they do, only around 51% do not have a title deed or property ownership papers. 40% of urban women live in informal settlements, and 90% of rural women live in inadequate housing. Inadequate housing is defined as either and not having waste disposal, electricity, proper utilities, water, gas, etc. So women who do own a house or land, again, cross-sectional data, cross-tabulated data, suggests that they have very little control over family planning and health seeking, almost none, how to spend their own income, or choice for husband. So where do we go from here? The second part of the book, each book chapter has policy recommendations based on the problems that we've been able to identify. So I'm not going to be able to talk about all of them, but I'll cover one. So the area related to housing loan schemes, some of the policies that are mentioned, and again, I can only briefly list them over here, but there's more detail. We need to introduce policies for affordable housing loans for women, separate loan quotas for women that cater not just to construction, but also maintenance. We need housing loan policies for women to be free of taxes and other duties. 3, we need to introduce policies for women group loans in gated communities. This has worked in other countries. We need capping policies for installment rates and loan returns, which obviously match average incomes of women. The chapter has information related to average incomes and then GDP to mortgage ratios and some calculations which will be helpful. These obviously need to be looked into every year, obviously, depending on changing circumstances and inflationary pressures. So another area of the book, food security and nutrition policy. Again, this could be separated for future researchers. Ironically, Pakistan is one of the countries in the world, it's an agrarian economy, and yet the females are known for high rates of food insecurity and malnutrition. There are several reasons for this related to poverty, culture, and then also lack of literacy for dietary diversity, informal sector employment, etc. NNS, National Nutrition Service statistics tell us that below the age of 5 years, 40% of girls are stunted, 17% are wasted, and 28% are underweight. With regards adult women, majority at 53% are underweight and 44% are obese. Now, this is a statistic less talked about, that we have issues with obesity, and there are some obesity policies mentioned in the book as well. Women who are underweight, they have the following characteristics. They drink unsafe water, they don't use bed nets, they don't have health insurance, and they don't have less decision-making for controlling health-seeking behavior and controlling their income. So again, cross-tabulated and secondary data in the book has been used to identify the different policy areas. Again, 8 policy areas have been discussed to improve food security and nutrition in the country. I'm going to talk about only one, financial security. We need food rations and food subsidies for women, but we need them to be distributed based on need and minority status. So some of the vulnerable groups are, ethnic minorities, aging women, special needs females, displaced females. There's more about this in the book. We also need policies which limit or ban retail tax for different women groups. This is hitting people and their purchase of basic necessities. Free multivitamin provision. This has helped in other countries to females in schools, women who are pregnant and women who are during the lactation period has helped. And this should be distributed at primary level. We can mandate nutritious meals in schools, including breakfast and lunch, and a policy that also works as the option for takeaway food. So this doesn't just help in the maintaining the nutrition throughout the day, but also it helps in girls not having to contribute to household work, but actually studying at home. So we also need massive state subsidization and investment for women farmers. The book discusses areas related to water for irrigation, livestock, seeds distribution, which can improve production and also maintain nutrition and reduce malnutrition rates. So another area for the book, environmental and disaster risk policy. Pakistan, we know, is suffering not just from natural disasters, but for years we have issues related to water, air, and motor vehicle emissions. Women compared to men face more problems due to reduced social mobility, inability to continue work, and they suffer from loss of income. They don't have time for leisure and rest, and they share the greater burden for recovery. Ironically, women are considered to be agents of recovery during disaster periods or when environmental degradation occurs, and they have so little agency themselves that I wonder why this is usually quoted in the literature or recommended. But anyway, women also suffer a lot because majority of them reside in informal settlements, so they suffer from loss of privacy and inadequate living environment and hygiene standards. Pakistan Maternal Mortality Survey confirms that in the last 5 years, above 30% of women have suffered from natural disasters. And these women are now also suffering multiple compounded challenges. They are the ones who don't receive in-kind cash transfer support, 15% of them. Around 86% are not part of a social organization which provides them continuous support. Many of them do not have access to a community health worker, which is why 96% are still delivering their child with an unlicensed provider. And 47% have no access to medicines in their village. So the book goes on to discuss 8 policy areas. I'm going to discuss 1, identity management. We need immediate citizenship identification and birth certificate registration for females. Separate flags need to be created for environmental vulnerability and displacement. So if we're not going to give them a separate card, on their existing card, maybe a red corner can be placed. This registration must occur at doorsteps within the communities. These women also need allocation of cash subsidies and vouchers for different needs, be it shelter, be it food transfers, but also other utilities and school vouchers for their children once they're in displaced settings. Even if they're provided shelter support, this needs to be planned and monitored in a careful manner to transfer them to permanent housing over a period of maximum 1.5 years. We can set up the book talks about setting up a council for this, etc. And then these women also need education, skill development, and support for income generation. Another area of the book, literacy and skill development. So we know that Pakistan's primary school enrollment is one of the lowest in the world at 62%, but the dropout is very high. By the time females reach tertiary enrollment, it's only 12%. ASAR data is also dismal in terms of girls who are in school between the ages of 15 and 16. Very few of them can actually read sentences, read English words, or do subtraction, which means we have education quality issues. The share of disabled girls is only 0.5 to 0.7%. Now, this is sad because some estimates suggest that disability rate of special needs people are at about 15 to 17% in Pakistan. So the book does talk about possibilities of inclusive education, but then also the need for separate special needs institutes, because some disabilities cannot be accommodated in conventional schools. Cross-sectional data from PDHS suggests that women of we have adult literacy issues as well, with 51% of adult women being illiterate. Illiterate women have the following social demographic characteristics related to health. They don't seek assistance from trained providers at 53%. They don't have control for autonomous decision-making at 90%, and they don't choose their own husbands at 74%. Almost none are receiving cash transfers from the government for skill development or adult literacy at 87%. So the book talks about 9 policy areas. I'm going to discuss 1, safety and travel barriers. We need, a policy that has worked in countries that have the similar culture to ours is separate schools and universities for females, or then separate timings for boys, females, and males. Separate transport with women drivers, security, and women conductors. And this is known as guarded transport schemes to improve retention of females in schools. Installation of CCTV cameras in all classes, corridors, and public streets with strict and swift accountability. This will improve trust and, again, enrollment and retention. And what's also helped, a wonderful policy that works in Australia is a neighborhood watch scheme and a parent volunteer scheme, especially in rural and remote locations. I think this could work in Pakistan as well. So another area, employment policies. We know that in Pakistan, the labor force participation is low, and a lot of this has to do with family and cultural barriers. In fact, some data suggests that 80% of the total time spent by females in Pakistan is on home care and care for dependents. This means they have less time for permanent work, formal sector employment, or professional advancement, or competing with men. Majority of the women are home-based workers or informal workers, and the average earning for them is only 4,000 rupees per month. Many of the women agricultural workers don't actually earn money. They receive in-kind payments, which means they have no buying power. And cross-sectional data tells us that non-working women have the following demographics. They don't have health insurance, almost all. They don't have savings accounts in banks or other financial institutions. even if they around 47% have mobiles, but their use of internet is very low at 12%, and use of mobile banking is only 6%. So again, the implication is that when we think that unemployment women can be injected with policies like, give them a microfinance loan and expect them to develop small businesses, it's a great policy, but it has to be partnered with other policies related to internet usage, training for mobile banking, etc. There's more about this in the book. So 8 policy areas have been recommended and discussed. I'm going to talk about one of them related to minimum pay and benefits. We need policies to revise and enforce the minimum pay. This needs to be done annually with income tax concessions and adjusted for inflation. We need to ensure that all employment benefits are for all working women, especially the majority informal sector workers and agrarian workers. For this, surveillance and monitoring councils can be set up. It's worked in other countries. These should obviously be led by women themselves and have different representatives from the community as well as policymakers. A limit on working days and hours with flexible work options and extended maternity leave, because our culture is such that overnight we're not going to have a symmetrical household assistance for women. So we need to have options for flexible work hours and home-based work as well. We need policies for provision of care facilities for other in-house dependents, because majority of the care is sometimes not just for children over the life course, but once the children have grown up, it shifts to aging parents, in-laws, relatives, special needs family members. We also need to mandate unions and social organizations across districts, across provinces. This will really help in information sharing, advocacy, and maintenance of minimum pay and benefits. So our last area, before we talk about the concluding recommendations and the last 3 chapters of the book, which are more macro policies, health policy. Unfortunately, Pakistan's women suffer from the quintuple health burden: maternal health issues, infectious diseases, chronic disease, multimorbidity, and mental health issues. Life expectancy is one of the lowest in the world. There are both sides issues. It's not just supply quality issues, but it's also uptake and utilization issues, demand. So we need to work on both fronts in Pakistan. Only less than 1% of the GDP is spent on health, which is one of the lowest in the world. And despite majority females suffering from poverty or middle class status, 78% are expected to pay for out-of-pocket health expenses in Pakistan. So state intervention for health literacy is usually dependent on social media. We've seen this during the coronavirus pandemic as well. But secondary data confirms that 98% don't have health insurance. And with regards to women's access to information through social media, well, 83% don't read the newspaper, 90% don't listen to the radio, 57% don't have a mobile, and 93% don't use an internet. So apart from the social media interventions, which are good, but they need, again, to be partnered with so many other interventions. And that's possibly the biggest issue with social policy interventions. They're highly dependent on partner interventions. It just needs planning. It doesn't mean that it's impossible. So again, 8 policy areas have been mentioned in the book. I'm going to discuss one very briefly: improving access. We can introduce policies for separate health cards and vouchers for different women groups, rural to urban, displaced to versus refugee status, different age groups. Aging and adolescent females are just completely eliminated from, and most of our concentration is on reproductive women's health. And then we need coverage of different health needs, not just hospitalization coverage. We need massive investment in primary healthcare and preventive health coverage, which will not just save costs, but also help in early detection. Online and telehealth services for remote population. Increasing staffing and resources is a major issue at the moment. Our lady health workers are expected to provide services at a ratio of 1 to 1,000. And again, we need fixed quotas for women providers. That's another major reason for underutilization when there are no women providers. Regular door-to-door visits have worked in other countries. Our LHWs these are usually restricted to remaining at the BHUs, and the visitations are often for polio vaccination, but not regular. What else can help are mobile health units and ambulance services for health transport for women in rural and remote populations and those who don't have permission. So the last 3 chapters of the book. There's a chapter on South Asia's collaboration. Now, South Asia, 95% of the population is from Afghanistan, Bangladesh, India, Nepal, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka. So the book goes on to discuss the different social protection flaws and social welfare policies for women in each of these countries. I'm not going to be able to cover them now. And the good news is that we have a lot in common: culture, language, ethnicity, and religion. So there are benefits to collaboration. The bad news is that most of these countries have inferior status of women, and some of their social demographics also match and require very careful consideration and planning. But the other good news is that we can actually plan this together. So majority of our women across South Asia have rural belonging, low literacy, informal sector employment, low wealth status, and the cultural conditions are the same in terms of the triple shift burden. South Asia is one of the regions of the world that spends the least on social policy, less than 1% on social welfare and the health sector, and less than 4% on education. So the major emphasis really has been on the private sector and the development NGOs making efforts for social protection. And now the book talks about different areas related to research council, a gender statistics database, economic collaboration, security collaboration. We have common issues like human trafficking across the border, a social action research council with academicians, liaising and developing social policy, and then advising policymakers in the country. We have a lot that we can collaborate on, and the book talks about this in some detail as much as possible. Again, the effort is that people who are maybe only thinking of South Asia collaboration but not necessarily researching only housing policy in Pakistan, they can benefit from this chapter, and vice versa. So how can we possibly implement social policy in Pakistan? We definitely need to start by developing a comprehensive social protection database. This is not a magic formula. Until we have the demographic data, we can't plan prudent policy. We need a results-based, robust monitoring accountability system. And to start off with, this accountability should be done on a quarterly basis. I've talked about this in the book. This is actually a separate chapter in the book. Before launching an upscale of any program and scheme, we need pilot interventions which are based on randomized controlled trials. This is what's missing in the current programs. This is why we have those programs have not been able to show impact. The role of religion and social media is immense. The book talks about, the role of religious leaders, religious curriculum, interfaith harmony, and the role of social media in developing a culture of social protection. Financing social policy, I've covered this as much as I can. It's a favorite area for me. I've tried to cover only those areas that help to build a self-sustainable model without external debt. I've talked about recording and regulating the informal economy to develop a better tax base, reallocation of government budgets. Please don't hate me, but we can take some money away from defense and civil salaries to social policy. Improving poverty reduction schemes. Right now, the book talks about how the current microfinance portfolio, for example, for poverty reduction has its limitations, which doesn't consider aspects like inflation and low PPP. And then raising revenue from state-owned industries, which actually contributes as much as agriculture. So there's great potential over there. There are countries that have doubled their state-owned enterprise revenues and channeled that money straight into social welfare. Countries in Europe have done this. And then using fiscal reserves, saving certificates, municipal bonds, foreign remittances for social welfare. We also have one very big untapped area, and that is use of zakat, ushur, waqf. We have a 25% Shia population use of khums. So once we build trust and have a good auditing system, there'll be much more contribution in these schemes, which can be redirected to social policy. So my last chapter. I can't see this. I hope you can see it from on top. I can only see the bars. But basically, I recommend this is not comprehensive. It's just a start. It's just something to say that, well, unless we have 5 layers at the government, if we want state sponsorship of social policy, we need the layers to go from top to bottom to local governance. Local governance is probably the weakest area in Pakistan. So if we have a Ministry of Social Policy for Women, and we have directors at provincial level and at district levels and at community level, then my recommendation is that we need at least 10 social protection officers initially serving 1 to 200 clients. Hopefully that will be reduced. Remember that I think WHO recommends that social workers should be at a ratio of 1 to 25. So our lady health workers are working at a ratio of 1 to 1,000. But if we have 10 social protection officers working with even 200 clients within the communities, we will be able to resolve the missing gaps, have somebody for advocacy and information sharing, collecting data. And I'm just going to talk about one area in the interest of time. So if we have a social protection finance officers in the other good news is that we have BHUs in Pakistan. So these community-based women's social protection officers can actually be partnered or situated next to the BHUs. And the finance officer can coordinate to work for basic income for the girl child, income tax and retail tax exemptions, loan and interest rate information and management, relevant cash transfer schemes, and then savings and health insurance schemes. And this can be added on. This is just this data in the white, the rows in the white, are basically the data that I've been able to identify from empirical evidence in my book. And then maybe if something like this is launched in 4 or 5 years, we identify other needs and the responsibilities increase. And another last aspect I have to talk about in the book, and I've summarized this information in different tables, or just a little bit of it I've pasted over here, is the need for a Ministry of Social Policy or social policy interventions in the country to closely liaise with other social sectors. It is almost impossible for family and housing policy to be effective without the legal and the security sector taking responsibility and working in coordination. So for example, you cannot implement laws related to marriage and dowry or inheritance and housing. Those laws don't exist. We need to actually introduce them unless we have the legal and the security sector working with us. Just one more example. We can't expect food security and nutritional policy to work unless the legal and security sector is enforcing agricultural subsidies, food vouchers for poor, and it's implementing trade laws and bans on harmful toxins and pesticides and other chemicals used in farming. So that's it from my side. And I hope I've given you enough interest that you can go and read the book in detail. I haven't been able to cover everything. Again, I'd like to thank everybody at PIDE. I consider PIDE my family, so many colleagues over there, and also Dr. Hadia and all of you for attending today. I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jafree. Wonderful presentation. It's a wonderful book. I've recently finished reading it, and I have tons of questions. But I would first request Dr. Majid for her comments.
Sure. Thank you very much. What a fantastic presentation. Sara, you've done amazing work. So I don't have a presentation. I just have some comments written down. So I'll just go through those. Is that fine, Dr. Mariam?
Sure.
All right. I'll try and keep it brief. I'm cognizant of the time. So, Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you all for being here. I'm really delighted to be here to discuss this really important and timely piece of work by Dr. Sara Jafree. The amount of time and energy that she's put into this book is evident as soon as you open it up and see the first page. She's produced this fantastic book, which is discussing so many different aspects of social policy and protection for women. And she comes at the problem from many different angles. She discusses not just cash transfers, but housing, food, work hours. She provided us a whole list today and went through the salient features of each chapter. And what I find truly magnificent about this book is a focus on women. And it's driven, I feel, by both the intrinsic and instrumental importance of women's status in general development. So just to give you an example, with half her population remaining out of the labor market or at best being engaged in very poor, productive and unremunerated activities, there's clearly tremendous potential that we're leaving untapped in the economy. And Dr. Sara talks about this in her chapter on employment. So clearly, there is instrumental importance for women, and this is reflected again when you start looking at the evidence. There's decades now of accumulated evidence that shows that the more you empower women vis-a-vis spending and other decision-making, the better the outcomes for children, as well as many different multiplier effects throughout the economy. But if you put aside the instrumental arguments, there is, of course, the fact that the issues that Dr. Sara highlights in her book, these are all fundamental rights. And the state of these rights for half of the Pakistani population is just simply unconscionable. So there's a real emergency, and she talks about this in her book. There's a real need for action. So one other thing which I find really interesting, and she touches upon this in her introduction, is that women make up some of the most highly marginalized groups in our country. There's been a feminization of poverty. Men are moving into better paying jobs. There's a feminization of agriculture, of disease. She highlighted some of these in her presentation as well. And while there are arguments in the issues of measurement, and that's fine, sure, there are, but you can't deny the poor state of women in the country. It's highlighted to us every year when the Global Gender Gap Index comes up. And my firm belief is that if we can make real headway into solving some of the issues that women have, which is one of the most marginalized groups in the country, it can serve as a blueprint on how to do research and how to design policies to improve the lot of other marginalized classes and groups too. So I think aside from the content of the book, Sara also provides us with a fantastic blueprint on how to do research on these really difficult topics. So I really appreciate how Sara lays out the chapters, the use of secondary data as well as interviews, talking about existing policies and providing food for thought for future directions. So we have a really holistic overview. And I think that is something that's been missing, and it's great to finally have a resource which provides all of that. I know that there are always going to be maybe one particular chapter could have been more laid out, or maybe the people will think, oh, there's something missing in the book. And I think that's actually fantastic because it gives Sara room to provide us more of these installments. And I know it's long work and it's hard work, but I think the chapters on the regional outlook, there's so much more room to play around with that. I would, for one, would be really interested in just time lapse of these topics. So I would be interested in 10 years down the line, another installment of the same book, and to see what is the progress that has been made, or where are we still lacking? How are we doing in terms of regional cooperation? How is the region doing overall? So I think just having an update of this book come out every 5 years, that would be so interesting for us. The other thing that I really appreciated about the book, and I find really interesting, and in fact actually find quite tragic, is that there is recognition on multiple fronts, both within Sara's book as well as otherwise. There's been recognition by multiple Pakistan governments of the need for action, and just how far off targets we remain despite the interventions that we continue to do. So I'll give you an example. The introduction of Chapter 2 states that the Pakistan government recognizes the need for social protection for its population. In fact, the Pakistan Economic Survey has an annual report which dedicates an entire chapter to describing state efforts for social protection. You can say the same for housing, for malnutrition. In fact, we had a Vision 2025, which placed women's employment front and center, and it laid out some really desperately needed targets, which the country would have hit 2 years from now had we taken action on those particular parameters. This vision was, of course, abandoned, and that's what we typically see. So we have all these great documents making the rounds, and when you start looking at those documents, they lay out some really fantastic policy, but we're not seeing the kind of action that we need to really make that headway in the areas that Dr. Sara also points out. So why are we consistently failing to make this headway? Why are we falling behind other countries in the region? And we've fallen behind Bangladesh, we're falling behind Sri Lanka. And I think even when it comes to these sort of more macro level questions, I think Sara's book provides some really interesting insights. So I'll give you an example. In her housing chapter, Sara talks about the role of patriarchy. So she says the patriarchal culture does not consider that women need protection within the home and house for a diverse set of needs. So I think this really aptly summarizes a lot of misconceptions that remain about the reality of the extent of the problem. Why do women need to work? Why do they need assets? They have their families to take care of. These are common refrains that we hear again and again. And just having that mindset, and I think she talks about this in the last few chapters as well, has knock-on effects on other dimensions. So as she points out in the chapter on food and nutrition, Pakistan faces an emergency situation to food shortages, food security, and undernutrition of women. And part of the reason why we're in this really desperate situation is because women don't own their own land or house, they don't have health insurance, and much of this has to do with the kind of attitude that we have or the kind of social norms that we have. This is one side of the problem, the demand side, and Sara actually talks about this when she discussed the health chapter with us. On the supply side, we have severe infrastructural issues at both the town and village level. You can see them very clearly in our public health system. You can see them very clearly in our public education system. And I think these supply side factors combined with the demand side factors have really worked to increase the gender gap, or I should also say, prevent us from reducing the gender gap. I could really go on and on, but I also want to leave some time for questions, which I know Mariam also has, and I'm sure that others within the audience will also have. In the end, I will say that the book, what the book lays out for us is that there are multiple layers of gender inequality. They're not just at the public goods and services level, but they're also at the household level. Sara brings in regional biases for us as well. And I think we just need to think through all of these layers as well as how they interconnect. And we're not alone in thinking through this. Sara, as the author, gives us a roadmap on how to systematically address these inequalities, how to think through these inequalities, and also how to think through the data issues. All in all, I think it's a great resource for those looking to both educate themselves as well as those who want to use this as a resource in the classroom. I am really looking forward to perusing this book many times over. So I've read through it once, I want to read through it again and again, and I really look forward to using this in the classroom. So thank you, Sara, and a job well done.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Hadia. Could I request the audience to send their questions in the chat section? It would be easier for us to read through the questions if they're in written format. And meanwhile, maybe Dr. Jafree can respond to Dr. Majid. I'm waiting for questions in the chat section. Thank you.
Hi, Hadia, I'm so very grateful. It's a great honor that you took out time to read this and participated today. The biggest thing is also for us that, we are easily able to disseminate internationally sometimes, but not with our local scholars and our local colleagues. And it's us basically that need to be talking about these issues. I didn't catch the question if you had one, Hadia.
I didn't. I just had, my main question is basically, Sara, when are you giving us the next installment?
When you're collaborating with me, that's all I can say.
I would love to do that.
Inshallah, yeah. I'm actually, please pray for me. Jokes aside, I'm working on child policy and child protection, but I don't know. I'm hoping one of you guys, my colleagues and my students, somebody else comes and finishes it first. That's my prayer.
I have questions. I have comments. The one thing that I, despite other than the fact that it's so holistic, it covers almost every single area that I could think of.
Yes, Anil, you can open your mic and ask the question if you want. Okay, go ahead, Mariam. Yeah.
The one thing that, sorry, I was busy taking care of the chat section. That it's extremely holistic. It covers almost every area and of social policy about women. And one thing that it does not do is it does not treat the issue of women's marginalization in Pakistan as a trickle-down effect of inequality in general. For example, women's poverty is another issue, and it's not just a problem of poverty, in general. So one thing that it identifies is it was that. The other thing that I loved was that every single chapter had a section about how to liaison and coordinate with other policy areas in order to make it more implementable. And so that's one thing that I absolutely liked. One question that I had was that while you do mention it several times in the book, is the role of other stakeholders in the implementation process, because there's a lot of discussion about the implementation process in general. For example, the role of the NGOs and the role of the non-governmental bodies that can assist in these policy areas. I would maybe like for you to discuss how you see the role of these bodies, how you see the role of the NGOs, and what is their role in the coordination process, other than, of course, the government policy areas.
Yeah, thank you, Mariam. There's one part in the book that does talk in detail about the stakeholders, and then it recommends that what has worked in Europe is that if you have a council, if you have a ministry for social policy or social welfare, and you have a joint council, and you have representation from all the stakeholders, it will give a platform for everybody to contribute and know where their roles and responsibilities exist, whether it's for housing policy, whether it's for formal sector inclusion policy, because it's not just campaigners and researchers and academicians who need to be involved. In Pakistan, academicians and independent researchers are never involved in policy formation, which they need to be. But then also, like you mentioned, NGOs and civil society, and also different layers of the bureaucracy, especially local governance. This is what the book talks about as well, because that's the missing link. We talk about things on top, but then it doesn't get implemented, and it's not effective at the bottom. It's not reaching out at the primary community. So we need representations of everybody in a council so that they're on the same platform. That would help. That's one action that would help. Meeting regularly, discussing, and then forming policy based on agreement, and then being clear on what each sector's roles and responsibilities are. The last chapter tries to do this. So, for example, it clarifies that for formal sector inclusion policy, it's not just the employment sector. It's not, but then it talks about the roles and responsibilities of other sectors like the education sector, and the legal sector, and even the health sector. Because actually, believe it or not, empirical evidence confirms that the health sector has a role in formal sector retention of women in Pakistan. Can't. Actually, I was also replying to a comment. There's somebody called Anil who's saying that I cannot type my question. Can you please? I'm not sure. Let me open my mic. So, I mean, I don't have a problem if you do, Mariam.
I don't.
I can't see any question. And
Anil, can you please raise your hand and maybe I can allow you? Meanwhile, could we take other questions? There's several. Do you want me to read them out?
Yes, please.
Okay. So the first one is, I hope I'm not missing any. It's what is the role of civil society in promoting effective social policy for women? Can you cite some successful examples? I think this is what.
Yes, there's an immense role. There's an immense role. And my book, there's a part of the book that talks about it. Maybe it's the second last chapter, because social media, use of social media and developing a culture of social policy is very important, especially for countries like Pakistan. Because when you talk about social policy interventions, starting from the first structure, social scientists usually call family the first substructure of society. And if you're trying to implement a social policy at family level, for example, for child marriage, underage marriages, then the culture of social protection and arguing from sometimes, UN Women has asked me to come and speak about this next week. And I was just wondering how to summarize this or condense the information. Some people will argue that zero tolerance policy is important. So, for example, you've just decided that this is a human rights concern. Somebody below the age of 18 cannot give a consent for marriage, and you just then don't listen to religious leaders or other politicians or stakeholders about their input. Whereas another softer way of doing this is actually using social media to influence civil society and engage them in developing a culture of social protection and making them aware and reach consensus about what human rights are and what the benefits are of adhering to certain rules and laws, even if they may defy traditional norms. So the role is, in answer, the role is immense. Civil society is key over here. Again, and another aspect that the book talks about is the contribution of zakat, ushur, and waqf. Pakistani societies, and I think Indonesia and Malaysia have been somewhat successful in this, is that when you take zakat and you allocate a portion just for social development and social welfare, civil society will actually start contributing more. Obviously, trust in governance is very important as well. We like I said, we need parallel interventions. We need to, but so yes, in answer, it's immense. And one way to engage them immediately is through social media.
Yes, there's one more. And there's a couple more. It says, what factors do you think are responsible for the share of non-farm related employment going sharply down for men in non-urban settings, whereas the same figure for women has not gone down significantly? Given the high,
This is actually true in Pakistan, that because of internal migration and the assumption of better earning opportunities, men tend to shift out from agricultural work, leaving the women behind. And the book talks about this as well. There are a lot of women being left behind and being responsible for agrarian output. Somebody needs to write a book on the feminization of agriculture in Pakistan, or the feminization of feudalism. I've been writing notes about this. But obviously, these female farmers are not feudals. They are very poor. They're very impoverished. They lack coordination and agency for subsidization. And sometimes when schemes and tax exemptions are eligible, they don't have awareness about them. So this is true. This is happening. Why is this happening? Because I think men feel that they can migrate easily into urban areas, and they feel that they can earn money and send it back to the farm. And then we also have suffering from climate change and unpredictable agrarian output. So the women get left behind. And then there are issues, parallel issues related to this, such as malnutrition and food insecurity, and girls being taken out of school to help on the farm, etc. This is true. Somebody needs to research much more on this because it's a developing phenomenon in Pakistan.
I do have a paper going on something very similar. But it's not about the agricultural sector. It's about Quetta, the city in general, and the increase in male migration, and resultantly, there's more female mobility in the street. You see more female mobility, but when you dig deeper, because it's a qualitative study, and particularly in one part of the city, it's true what you're saying. Women do get left behind, and it does change the economic dynamic, whether it's agricultural or not. So yeah. There's one more question. It says women are mostly working marginalized work. What is the basic reason for that? What type of policies should we adopt?
Yes, majority of women in Pakistan, at 75%, are engaged in informal sector work, either agrarian work or home-based work. The reasons for this are multiple, cultural, and related to literacy, semi-literacy, illiteracy, the triple shift burden, not having enough time to work in the formal sector or work towards professional advancement, cultural barriers. So there are several reasons. They're discussed in the book. Now, what can be done? Again, there's a whole section on policies for formal sector inclusion. But remember, in Pakistan, you can't ask all the women overnight to start working in a private bank or a private sector or government jobs. So we need to actually find solutions to start providing informal sector workers with minimum pay, employment benefits, connecting them to unions, even from the home. And the book talks about this in some detail. There are ways to, even in the developed world, there will always be an informal sector economy. It's never going to disappear. This is usually you'll read about policy, how to eliminate the informal sector. It's not going to happen in Pakistan. There will always be women. There will be women who are highly educated and they choose to work in the informal sector as well. We've heard the case of medical doctors, female doctors. They don't want to work, and so many other women. Also during the life course, a lot of women don't want to work. So, for example, they might want to take a 5-year break while they're having children, and they're working online from the home. These are the women that need a lot of policy support in terms of employment benefits, minimum wages, etc. And there are some solutions discussed in the book.
There's one more question in a direct message to me. There's one saying, Dr. Sara provided a great and extensive study on the topic. Thoroughly enjoyed this intellectual debate. There's one more that says, could you ask Dr. Sara the following question? Have you spoken to anyone at the Ministry of Planning on the social policy for women, or how the existing policies could be bettered?
Well, they've just invited me to come and speak to them, so I'm going to go on Tuesday. So I haven't been able to. I have tried to talk to them in the past. I've also tried to get access to, 𝗪cie𝗰𝗶 program and 𝗪SAS program, women beneficiaries. I haven't gotten very far, but I'm going to be talking and disseminating some of my work with them next week. I'll be in Islamabad as well.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Somebody's just asked me a direct question that if they email me, will I send them an e-copy? Yes. Usually all our institution libraries will be able to access the e-copy and send it to you. I understand that the hard copy is very expensive for us in Pakistan. And if your library can't mail you the copy, then I'm happy to email it to you. Please just drop me an email.
That's very generous of you, Dr. Sara. Thank you so much. Do we have any more questions? So that's about it. From the audience's side, thank you so much, Dr. Jafree, for your presence. Thank you so much, Dr. Hadia, for your comments. It was a wonderful, fascinating presentation. I have no idea how you managed to do it in half an hour, because the book is so holistic. I thought only one aspect or one chapter of the book would, require one presentation. Or one webinar at least. So
I was going to ask you that. I was going to say, Mariam, should I just cover housing and family policy? But thank you so much. I'm so grateful. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Hadia. Thank you, Dr. Mariam, and my PIDE family. I see many of you here. Thank you so much.